In this tutorial we're going to be getting to grips with Nuke Studio, and we're going to be following the conforming process of an edit. In this particular case I've got Premiere open and I've just got this little short 7-shot sequence in here, and it combines a couple of different things, like a potential visual effects shot there, something there where we could maybe flip that around, and maybe a little bit of color correction. So it is going to enable us to exploit the scope of Nuke Studio. These files are low resolution QuickTimes that have been done. I think they're something like 720 by 405, so they are in 16:9 aspect ratio, but they're in some low resolution format. And it's not unusual for an editing department, when they're working in the offline phase, to be working with low resolution versions of the masters. And that's kind of the workflow that I'm trying to show here, even though I'm not working with massive files. I just want to get this process across. So the editing department would be working on this. They would get to the point where their edit would be signed off by the director and production team, and that would be known as picture lock. At that point the edit can be transformed to the conforming phase of the project. Now this tutorial essentially is going to follow that process. Now the edit is transferred via a proprietary file format called the edit decision list, or EDL, and there's or should I say it's a file, and it's a convention. There are 2 or 3 different file formats that can be used for it, but essentially they're the same. They're a text-based representation of the edit, and they refer to the name of each piece of footage, all the cuts, their position on the timeline, any speed changes, any transitions, etc. are all encapsulated into this text file. Okay, so we're in Premiere, and exporting an EDL is very simple. If we come to the export, I will need to make sure that the timeline's selected. We come down to the export. This is going to slip off the bottom of your screen, unfortunately, but if you do this you'll see that there's an EDL option and there's a couple of other options, AAF and Final Cut Pro XML. So there are 3 formats. I'm just going to choose the AAF one. I don't recommend the EDL. It's an old format. It tends not to be that reliable, particularly dealing with speed changes, transitions, and it only allows you to export 1 track at a time. Now you can see in this case we are actually only working with 1 track, so it doesn't really matter, but if we were working with an edit that had been made up of 2 or 3 or more tracks, then we would have to export an EDL for every single one of those tracks, and it can be a bit tedious. Anyway, I'm just going to take this in its default setting and say OK, and it's going to ask me where I want to save this. And in the root folder I've created an EDL folder, and I'm actually going to save it into. You can see I've already done it, so I will just give it an additional name. I'll just append it by a number and say OK, and that has created an EDL file. So if I just bring my folder structure in there and we're going to the EDL, you can see that where is it? I think, yeah, there it is, look, 01. So that's the AF file. You can see there's also an XML one in there, which is another form of an edit decision list, and then there's the standard EDL one. So I've actually been exporting these out. Anyway, we progress. So I'll close Premiere down, and we can now start to work in the Nuke Studio. So this is a Nuke Studio file that's opened, and I'm going to come in. This was formerly Hero. I'm going to come into this, and I'm going to create a new project. I've actually created one accidentally there, but anyway. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to import my EDL. So I'm going to come to File, I'm going to come down to Import. Unfortunately this is I'm going to be confined by the screen capture software here, so it's going to be quite tricky, but you can see there that's the EDL XML AF format. I'm going to choose that, and now it requires me to navigate to my folder. I can actually set this up to go to the default, which I'll probably do before we progress much more. So I'm going to come into my project, into the EDLs, and this is the EDL that I've just created. Okay, now you can see that straight away it's actually brought in the edit, it's conformed the edit. Hopefully that's exactly the same as the original. We'll check that in a bit. And it's even brought in the images. Now it doesn't always do that. If it doesn't bring in the images, then I will quickly show you what to do. In fact, it's brought in the images, but it's brought them in at the wrong. It's brought in the masters rather than the proxies, and I want to actually show that process. So I'm actually going to take the video offline just by deleting that out. So you can see now that the timeline's changed. All the clips are offline, and I'm doing that really just to show you how to bring the video in if it doesn't automatically come in with the EDL. So I'm going to change my workspace over to the conforming workspace. Again, I'm just going to have to quickly pop that back into my screen capture area. Unfortunately, when I switch workspaces, that's likely to keep happening. Unfortunately, I do apologize for that. Okay, we can see the difference with the conforming workspaces that we see effectively. We see our EDL, we see all the clips brought in there with all their relevant metadata. Okay, we can still see our edits here. Now, to bring in our media, we just come to Match Media, and then we navigate to our, I will definitely sort this out, we navigate to our project and into our plates, and here's our proxies, and we'll say open. This gives us some rules about how we actually sort of conform. We'll leave those as default for now. We can include and exclude particular patterns of suffixes, but I'm just going to say OK, and you can see now that this has actually brought this in. You can see now that these files are 720 by 405. Now we are actually going to conform these by upresing these back to the HD ones, but typically our project may well come in like this, so it may well come in at this kind of format with the, I'm just looking down this list to see if that 720/405 format's in, which it isn't. So if I needed to work for a while in that format before actually upresing, then I can choose custom, which is just off the screen capture, and I can set it up in here. So just going to double check that I haven't already created a proxy. No, I haven't. So I'll just create myself a proxy format, and I will tell it to be 720 by 405. And we can now use that format. And you can see the edit in place there, drawing on the low resolution proxy versions of the edit which would have been used in the offline phase in Premiere. So the next stage of the conforming process would be to upres this back to the masters. This would normally be a stage where we went up to the highest possible resolution, the highest scans of our plate footage. In this particular case, we've just kind of done it in reverse, so we're just going to do that again. So I'm just going to select my footage and press delete and delete that out, which takes all the clips offline. And then in the conform workspace, just choose Match Media, and this time I'm just going to go to my master footage and choose Open. And they will come in now. You can see that these are the 1920 by 1080s. So I just need to put my workspace back over to the full HD format, which is there. Okay, so that is the process of upresing. One thing that this process does show is how important it is to maintain good folder and file management, because essentially the proxy footage and the masters are named identically and they've got exactly the same folder structure. We could upres if they were different, but it would be a beast of a job, whereas because they're named the same, then everything just swaps out. So these clip references, these containers, are now just holding the high resolution version of the same thing. They haven't had to sort of start to redefine their paths and the file names and the file extensions, etc. So this is it's really important that you maintain good file and folder disciplines when you're actually following these kind of processes. Now, one thing that isn't particularly very intuitive or user-friendly is the naming conventions that have been applied to these clips. If I just stretch this out a little bit, you can see that these clips are basically taking their name from the metadata that's generated by the camera during the acquisition process, which each camera has their own rhymes and reasons for generating this, but that's obviously transferred into the image sequence, and therefore that's actually what's been brought in. Now, in terms of editing, it's not very helpful to us to have that kind of naming convention, so we want to be able to find a way of doing this. Now, it's actually quite straightforward. I'm just going to marquee select all my clips. I could have done it in the conform workspace as well. I'm just going to flip over to the editorial workspace. Unfortunately, again, that flips me back to my full screen, so I do apologise. This is a limitation of the screen capture software, or an incompatibility, should I say, between Nuke Studio and my screen capture software. So I'm just going to come down to my edit, make sure all of my clips are selected. So marquee, select them all. Now I'm going to right click, I'm going to come to editorial, which again I apologise is just off the screen, and I'm going to come down to rename shots. And that brings up this rename shot dialog, and this is really helpful. By default it would probably look like this. So it would basically be appending the name of the shot by 4-digit number, and that's obviously making provision for a sequence which would literally have hundreds of clips. In our case, we've only got 7 clips, so we don't need. We could effectively do this just with one digit, but we'll use 2. We can also tell it what frame and what number to start. So at the moment it's set to 10. For example, with some editing workflows, they start their numbering at 1001. In our case, we'll just set that to 1, and then the next thing is how many we increment our numbers by. This is set to increment by 10, which means we would get 1, 11, 21, 31, etc. I'm going to leave this at 1 so that we get a shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. But it would be useful to increment, for example, if we were creating interim iterations between and we wanted basically to leave ourselves a little bit of space to be able to put extra clips in. But after picture lock, that should be unlikely. Okay, so I'm going to hit the rename now, and you can see now that all our clips along the timeline have been renamed. And if I dare go into the conform workspace and cause the havoc in my screen capture area, then all the clips in the metadata section of the conforming workspace would also be renamed. You can see that the actual clip references themselves are still referencing the names in the folder in the operating system, where the names obviously haven't changed. This is just purely and simply the renaming of the containers. Something I should point out about the renaming process is that we've just used the sequential renaming, but we can use some of the other options in here just to rename individual clips, etc. You know, and there are some benefits to doing that, but in my particular case I wanted to use the sequential renaming because it's by far the most useful tool amongst that set. Okay, so let's move on. Now the next part of the conforming workflow is to check the conformed edit for accuracy against the original. So normally the offline team would have provided us with a low resolution proxy of the sequence, which I have, which I'm just going to get. It's in my exports folder of the project. So I've just got this proxy in, so I'm just going to drag that into my project. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it down onto my timeline, and I'll just dock it at the front. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to be able to check our original against, and one of the first things we'll be looking for is to make sure they're the same length, and you can see there that thankfully they are. I happen to know that the proxy is identical to the EDL, so I'm just going to offset it a little bit just so that I can give you a proof of concept. What we need to be able to do here is we need to be able to do a like-for-like check against these two, and we can actually do this in Nuke Studio, because Nuke Studio allows us to put 2 tracks of video onto the buffer. So to do this, I'm just going to choose my conformed edit, and I'm just going to type 1 to set that to the one side of the buffer, and I'm going to choose my proxy and type number 2. You can see we get this little widget appear here, and what we've got here, if I just expand this a little bit, is we've got a few little tools here, and this is very similar to in Nuke, which allows us to do like for like comparisons. So I'm just going to say, for example, switch to horizontal, and now we can see both tracks side by side. Now the reason why we're not seeing the proxy, which I've put into track 2, so it's over here, is because we're currently over here, but you see that as I come across, because I've offset the clip, then obviously it doesn't start at the beginning. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to check to see if there are any timing issues. Obviously I've nudged the entire sequence over, so there's a misalignment, and this might be misalignment on a shot by shot basis, so this requires quite a lot of scrutiny. Even on a short seven shot sequence like this, if there were problems, for example if the EDL hadn't conformed the any time changes that have been done inside the edit, you know, like speed ups or things like that, or some of the transitions haven't come across quite correctly, then it may take you know, it may take 30 minutes just to go through a short sequence like this, just to make sure everything's bang on. You've got to bear in mind that the edit has been signed off by the production team and the director, therefore you are completely committed to that edit, so you can't sort of you can't be loose with it at all. You've got to be absolutely bang on. So in this particular case, we could use a variety of different things to realign it. So we could use retiming tools inside the editorial suite in Nuke Studio, or we could use transforms, for example, if something needed to be just positioned, repositioned, or rescaled slightly. And so on and so forth. In this particular case, we know that these align perfectly, so if I just bring that over, then we can check now and we can see that they're identical. The other option, there are a few options here, but this wipe option is quite interesting. Again, I'll just offset that slightly so we can see. And what the wipe allows us to do is it allows us to just check through on a side-by-side basis, and of course we can, if I just come to that part there where one's turned to green and one hasn't, there, we can wipe across, we can rotate this. This might seem arbitrary, but there are some benefits for this. We can even take up and down the opacity, so it gives us another way of actually sort of doing a comparison between the two. Anyway, I'm going to actually take that. I'm going to assume that this is correct. In this case, it's so easy. I've just got to drop it there like that, and then I can perform an identical sort of check to make sure that's okay, and I know it's fine. So I'm going to delete out the proxy now, so that and we can go back to our original workflow. So what I want to do now is I just want to introduce the Nuke Studio soft effects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on my first hand shot, which directorial I know needs to be flipped, and I'm going to use a soft effect to do that. Now the soft effects are located, how am I going to get at these within the screen capture? I'll probably have to come up. Okay, so the soft effects are contained within this effects menu. Here you can see that we've got a whole bunch of different sort of simple tools, sort of a subset of the tools that exist within Nuke. Okay, I'm going to choose transform in this particular case because I know that this clip needs to be flipped, and the easiest way to do this is to just set it to -1 on the width. Okay, and that has now added this little interim strip on the timeline, which is a soft effect. Okay, you can see that by double clicking on it we can get back at those parameters and make changes to them, so this is something that is non-destructive. It can be adjusted at any time. We can also keyframe these things, as you might expect. So for example, let's say for argument's sake that we want to do a post-production optical effect on this. We want to zoom in on it. So what we'll do with this is that we will apply another soft effect and another transform. And what we will do is that we'll come across maybe to around the 5-second point, and we will bring the scale up somewhere like there. What we can do is that we can keyframe this, so we can come in to set key, and we can come back to the very beginning and then just bring our scale back down to its original. So what we've now got is a scale up over time. So they're just a couple of the tricks that are available to us in using soft effects. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to select this soft effect and copy it using Ctrl+C, and then I'm going to paste it onto the other two clips in my sequence that involve this hand flip, and you can see now that that's applied now to all three. Okay, Now we're about 20 minutes into this tutorial, so I think I'm going to break it at this point. So I'm going to create a second part to this tutorial where we're actually going to look at how we can break out shots like this for visual effects, and how we can actually create effectively a linking system. For those of you that have used After Effects and Premiere, or After Effects and Photoshop, you'll know that you can dynamically link between the two. Well, what we'll look at is how we can actually create a similar relationship between Nuke Studio and Nuke Scripts. So we will tackle that in the second part of this tutorial.